This is the Real Footy Podcast. Coming up, Ross Lyon brings the term nepo baby to the AFL. The Demons put on another excellent performance and things are looking decidedly blue for Carlton. We'll dissect all of that and more right after this.
Perryman is there and not get blood. Brilliance in this last quarter from Collingwood.
Rayner threatens again. Ashcroft always threatening, always with a knack of kicking big goals.
Got to run at it here, Petty. Over the top, got the ground level ball. Invites Pickett. Look at that. Just look at that man.
You know, I'm a little bit concerned they're chock full of talent, aren't they? The AFL nepo baby. But, yeah, look, they're really a go-forward team, straight line, really predictable.
Ross made a comment before the game and referred to Gold Coast as the AFL nepo baby. How did
Nepo baby.
nepo baby?
Oh, it's a little bit disrespectful, I think. Trust me, I've been at Richmond and I've come to the Gold Coast. We don't get a lot. What probably St Kilda should do is just make sure they focus on their own backyard instead of trying to bring everyone else down.
Hello and welcome. My name is Michael Gleeson and joining me today are Jake Niall and Carolyn Wilson. Welcome to you, nepo babies.
Well, I did get my job in journalism, Jake, when I was 17.
Yep.
Partly because I know I got down from about 500 to the last 40 in a job for a cadet
At the
Herald, because my father was then president of Richmond and had a friendship with Harry Gordon, the late great Harry Gordon. And I didn't even get a cadetship. I got a job as a copy girl.
And you've survived on nothing but nepotism and no talent since, haven't you?
Well, I think I think that's a pretty indirect link. That's not.
But
you weren't a member of the Murdoch family or something. I mean,
look, I think Ross he's brought the term penny dreadful into the footy vernacular. He's had a few over the journey, hasn't he? But was this one of his?
I'm enjoying the fact that he's got some interesting vocabulary that he's introduced into footy, as you're sort of saying. Yeah, but Gold Coast are a bit of a nepo baby. I don't think that's unfair, but they haven't won anything.
Better nepo than Frankenstein's baby. I mean,
Yeah. No,
Well, yes. Although, as our great producer Claire pointed out, it was the fact that he also called them predictable, which was pretty insulting as well, don't you think?
Well,
I mean, that was having a direct go, one coach at another coach.
it's a bit of a trend for Ross too. Like, he had a go at Matthew Nix, and that didn't go down at all well with Adelaide. He said Nix is under pressure for his job ahead of the Adelaide game when they played them.
Yep.
And Adelaide were filthy on that. He's trying to. It was this sort of idea of needling with the Gold Coast. There's the extra element to all of this is just that his president has had a go at Gold Coast. They're resentful of the fact that they're trying to rebuild, and they look at these other Johnny-come-lately clubs that are getting advantaged by academies, and they can't get access to players. Well, they had a pretty good player called Ben Long at their club, and has been doing quite well for Gold Coast. So, I understand their logic, but it's finding excuses and finding blame for their own mishandling over the years in other people.
Well, you could say it's a battle between a club that's had over 100 years of largely failure and a club that's had 15 years of complete failure. So, I mean, it's sort of, but in the end, St Kilda have, fine, I don't mind that they represent themselves and try to get the best deal for themselves. But if you're going to go down this road, I'm not talking about Ross so much as St Kilda collectively and Andrew Bassett, let's disclose all of the truths here. So let's disclose the fact that you're funded to a level that's well in advance of other clubs not over Gold Coast and GWS, of course, but over other Victorian clubs. What's the comparison with the Western Bulldogs? And you've now got the Western Bulldogs recruiter at your club. Well, there's good reason for that, because look at your draft picks, St Kilda. You had Caulfield and Clark. The Bulldogs in the same year had Ed Richards and Norton. And we see where teams are. It's not St Kilda's biggest problem has been St Kilda.
Yes, and St Kilda's other biggest problem is when they overstep the mark in these criticisms, as you say. So Andrew Bassett having a go at the best and fairest at Brisbane 2 days after they've won the flag. I mean, and I know I keep saying this, but it was just such poor sportsmanship. I think he regrets that now. He didn't really think it through, and I think he feels bad about that. But and yet that they did then get great draft compensation for Josh Battle. So St Kilda people will say, well,
Windhager. By the way, Windhager and Mitch Owens, they're from NGAs, and NGAs are farcical as it is the way they operate. I think the Northern Academies have got
not the Northern Academies.
No, the Northern Academies I think are necessary for the code and for those clubs who are not going to attract players in the same way that
NGAs
are
whinging
not
about premiership teams. I find I think when a club wins a premiership, I don't think that's sort of out of order.
It's always happened though.
But particularly 2 days afterwards. And then Ross, it's okay to say they're the nepo baby, but probably when you're hosting a game that you're probably going to get beaten, and they were. They
beat them last year, and it was like 7-6. It was a terrible game, and
it was a bit closer on the weekend, but it still, and 13,000 people turned up, and they want to play at the MCG, so they leave themselves a bit open.
They're leading with their chin a bit here, aren't they?
Mm.
I think Damien.
But wasn't it, just to be fair to Ross, wasn't it a kind of a throwaway line though?
Well,
it wasn't taken that way.
You can look at it that way, but as Gary said, it didn't feel off the cuff. You come in with a thought in mind. I thought the response from Gold Coast was good. They were clearly upset about it. Damien Hardwick had a crack back, which is
Mark Evans,
fair enough.
the CEO, had a much bigger crack on Monday morning on Melbourne radio, and said that he was so disappointed that he made a comment during the game to Carl Delena, his opposite number at St Kilda, and was not happy with the response he received from Delena.
Well, it's
on.
I like the fact that he also said, well, when they played in the grand final, was that down to being gifted Rewalt, Ball and Kajitsky?
Well, I had to pick them.
Yeah, but he's making the point of priority picks and draft assistance.
Well, that's under a system that was available to everyone. I think that if St Kilda critique, I think the draft price being paid for recruits that are very good is something that the competition has to seriously look at. So but that's not what St Kilda. They haven't condensed the argument to something as
the
direct
NGAs
as that.
are ridiculous. Clubs go to Coates League teams and say, "What? You're in our zone. Well, we can have access to you. Oh, you once visited Dubai.
You were born in Hong Kong.
Yeah,
at a time when the AFL, to widen the conversation, one of the first things Laura Kane did, or maybe was forced to do, when she became head of footy, was rip $20,000 out of each of the Coates League clubs. So you're not even developing talent the way you should be.
So you
should be putting so much more money into it. You're actually taking it out.
This is the bigger problem confronting St Kilda is they're trying to rebuild, and they're looking at this year's draft, and more than 50% of the best players are already quarantined from being able to be picked. And that's because the bulk of the talent normally comes from Victoria. And Victoria hasn't produced high-end talent this year, which also comes back to the fact they've had the guts ripped out of the funding of development in Victoria over the last 5 years since COVID, and hasn't properly restored. And this is the end product of it. They're not producing the talent to the same level. So these clubs that are being denied academy players or NGA players are then trying to fish in a pool that's empty.
Yeah. And further to that, just a thing on this, a watch on St Kilda is obviously their favourite at the moment to get to Conning out of Carlton, but to get TDK out of Carlton for a massive amount of money, that's fine. But if Nasiah Wanganeen Malira goes to one of the South Australian clubs, I think that would more than negate the game.
Well, that would be a disaster for St Kilda.
It would be a disaster. And I think that St Kilda, if that happens, the St Kilda regime, are on notice, and there'll be no amount of politicking and comments that people will accept. People will say, get your house in order, St Kilda. You've got your best player. You're paying this money. This would be a big moment if it happened. Now, hopefully he stays.
They've gone out of their way to work closely with their whole Indigenous setup, and Paul Vandenberg's been down there having, full days with the club. He's been back repeatedly, and that's at Ross's instigation because the two men have a good relationship, and they have a lot of good young Indigenous players at St Kilda, but they need to keep Malira.
They do. They also, I mean, they made
it.
a thing under Lethlean as well of trying to target Bayside kids. So they're looking at Bergman as well.
Yeah, well, the reasonable chance.
Yep. You get the kids that grew up anywhere down that Bayside and say, well, we're trying to use. They were trying to use a Geelong sort of point of geographical difference, which is a bit harder when Hawthorn's now in Dingley about three.
Yeah. If they lost, just to be fair here, just to recalibrate what I said, if they gained TDK, they lost Wanganeen Malira, they gained Bergman, and they gained Leaker-Lear, they'd be ahead, probably?
Well,
or is the publicity, or is Wanganeen
give up and lose?
You can't lose Wanganeen Malira. Sorry, I'm having issues with my pronunciations today. No, that's a net disaster.
Okay. By the way, there was a game played, and they lost it, and the Gold Coast won it
again.
And in the last quarter, it was Ben King, the twin brother of the St Kilda forward who wasn't playing, and the one that St Kilda had said, "We'll see you in a few years' time," when he was drafted, and he was the one that kicked a couple of goals to just safeguard the win. So, but also the other thing with that game was that Damien Hardwick's side won at Marvel Stadium, which was I'm sure he would have rather the game at MCG. No,
couldn't beat the Tigers. Speaking of Indigenous brilliance, Cozzy Pickett at the MCG, how good
he's been. I mean, I know it can be a bit superficial, but he feels like he's been the transformative one for them in the resuscitation and revival of Melbourne from early in the season, where they were just seemed to be warring and uncertain, and he was brilliant.
He was, and that was an unbelievable win for the Demons, and it seemed to have a galvanising look. I mean, wins do that, but
the way they ran to Clayton Oliver after a goal, it's got a.
The way the handling of the coach with Clayton Oliver over the last few weeks, which we've talked about.
Yeah, and I'll pay one to you, Caro. You were pretty steadfast for Simon Goodwin a few weeks ago, I think. And it looks like, I mean, I find it hard to see now with everything that Brad Green has said publicly and the noises coming out of there that he will not be coached next year. I would be very surprised.
I completely agree with you, and I think he deserves to be.
No, he does.
And I think there will be big changes at Melbourne around Simon Goodwin, but he'll be there.
Well, most importantly, in a football sense, 19 goals they kicked. This is a team that could not kick a score, and that's the highest score they've kicked in 2 years. Cozzy kicks, he kick 5? But they looked more threatening. They were using the ball better. They were moving it faster. They looked threatening. Yeah, okay, it's a weakened Sydney team that you've got, the outs that we know that they've been labouring with all year, but others have come up against Sydney and found them a far more difficult opponent. So I think it was certainly the best Melbourne performance of the year, because of not just winning but the score.
At least you were hot on the Troy Chaplin move to being the forward coach. He was the backline coach, and you said, "Why move a guy?" Well, what have you got to say now?
Why take a strength?
Away
and add it to a weakness?
Add to a weakness now. They're kicking 120 points.
One game, Charlie.
It's not one game.
Well, 19 goals, yes. No, my point is they raved about him being the best defensive coach in the AFL, then turned around and said, anyway, we're making him our forward coach. Now, I just don't – the logic of it still escapes me. Now, you do it for their development, but I don't understand why you take people that are, midfield coach and decide, right, now you're going to work with the forwards. Well, on the basis of what? You've never been a forward. Anyway, that's
maybe the big change at Melbourne is just that it's going to sound really primitive and backward kind of. They just looked happy.
Yeah,
I saw them out on the field. Like, these guys look like they're really enjoying themselves.
Christian Petrarca had a big grin on his face and a lot of family love there.
Maybe the kumbaya has come true.
Well,
they did up in the...
I mean, winning papers over everything, doesn't it? I mean, suddenly we're not so worried about when the CEO starts, that the president's away, that there's no leadership at the club. The only leadership you need is Max Gawn when you're playing like this, and he was fantastic. Can I just comment for a moment again on attendance? I mean, the commentary said, I wasn't there, I watched the game on TV, 38,000, not a bad crowd. I would have thought that was pretty disappointing.
Yeah.
38. I mean, I know Melbourne.
Melbourne are not a big club. I think this is something that, Melbourne Melbourne, that's a reasonable crowd for
Winnable
Melbourne.
game, sunny Sunday.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought it was disappointing, but I guess that's what they come to expect.
I mean, Sydney seem to have a bigger foothold here than in Melbourne than other non-Victorian teams, including Brisbane. So I think they turn up a bit, but I didn't think it was way under. I thought 13,000 for the Saints game was way under.
Can we have terrible? Can we have a quick comment on Sydney before we go on?
Yep.
So, the statistics of teams who get flogged in grand finals are not good the following year.
Yep.
And not good for the next couple of years. Obviously there's injury. They've had injuries. They've got a new coach, new style, obviously, new style of coach. But do you think that's what we can blame this on to a degree, that they haven't really mentally recovered? They've lost their mojo and their confidence?
No, well, I think that there was always there's the change, but you can't go Mills, Papley, Goulden, McDonald, Amati. I mean, these are really important players.
Well, I think
the last two maybe not so much, but you got your captain, one of the best small forwards in the game, and one of the most dynamic midfielders, and you take them all out.
Yep.
Like that's enormous. So I think they've been
Mills,
doing
Papley
pretty well
and
to be where they are now. Like
I agree.
Some of the teams, and look, Melbourne. This is the sort of performance we've been waiting for and expecting from Melbourne, and expecting it regularly from Melbourne. Now they go to Alice Springs and play St Kilda this week, so they should get well.
They'll go into that game
as strong favourites,
yep.
and then they've got King's birthday the week after that. So, and I think the bye for them. So they could, if they come off St Kilda into Collingwood, that'll be a big game. But they could easily win both of those games. Not easily, but they can win both of those games and go into the bye. And you go,
if they go into the bye, if they can win in Alice Springs and then knock off Collingwood, because there's a good break before that game, that'll be a 9-day break. Then they'll be every chance.
Well, they go in at 7 and 6 then.
Yep.
Jake, massive game last Thursday night between Geelong and the Western Bulldogs. Stories on and off the field. Which was the biggest story for you?
The biggest story for me was that the Bulldogs blew this game, and all amount of subplots don't get around that reality that this is a game that they were good enough to win, had enough of the good players to win, had enough opportunities to win, and they blew it. And there was a lot of moaning about the umpiring in the game behind the scenes, and Luke Beveridge, I believe, was asked about it and just hosed it down and said, no, we were terrible in the second quarter. And Geelong yet again find a way, and Jeremy Cameron and Neil kicked 11 straight. So, I mean, it becomes... I know there were these subplots with Bevo and Kane Corns, and there was also the Bailey Smith huge backdrop to the game, which was a massive...
Credit to him, he played a good game.
He played very well, and credit to him this whole season.
It did look like they ignored him until the end, when I think it was Fraser had turned the ball over and he rubbed his head and then Libba really didn't like it. I think it was Fraser, maybe it was O'Donnell. And he rubbed a Bulldogs player's head for a muck up, and Libba, that was the moment that he sort of turned and went, no, that's not on.
And Bailey Smith had to go at him after the game for scratching him.
Oh, yeah.
Said someone commented, was it Abby Holmes? I can't remember.
On the scratch on his neck.
I noticed you've got some scratches. He said, yeah, probably Libba.
Well,
they did wrestle. It might have been that, but
I just want to say, like, for all the things we criticise, which is a lot, what a good game it was.
It was a cracker.
I enjoyed it, and Geelong have been in a lot of good games, and so have the Bulldogs. These are teams I like to watch, and all the things about footy that are not right off the field, and the admin at the AFL, and all these things that have got a lot of work to do, grassroots, all sorts of litany of woes. But Geelong, when they play the Bulldogs, you want to see that game. Yeah. And Geelong playing good sides, those games, the Hawthorn game, the Collingwood game, they've been good games.
So why, Jake, have they built this stand and still yet to fill it? Why couldn't they fill it on Thursday night?
They've filled it. They've got 39 to that ground.
I'm not sure that's right.
They were predicting 40 a few weeks earlier after the Bailey Smith crack at Bontempelli. They were saying that was a 30,000 game. It's now a 40,000 game, and it wasn't. It was 32,000.
32.
Yeah. They've been struggling to get it above 34, and They build that, not even that, like sort of 32 to 34. Well, you build the extra capacity. You'd think a game like this, you could fill it. It is a Thursday night and it's in Geelong. You've got to get on the train to get down. And
I think what that tells you is that there are seat holders.
Yeah.
I'll bet they've sold all the tickets. There are seat holders that have not gone.
They weren't sold back, yeah.
And this is something that the AFL and the clubs need to do better at, is selling back tickets when people are no-shows.
What do you think of the jumpers?
Oh, it was terrible. I mean, I know that there was a deep First Nations significance to the Geelong jumper, designed with all the right intentions. But why would you design a jumper in Bulldogs colours?
Yeah.
I mean,
add red to the jumper when you're playing Bulldogs.
I kept thinking, Bailey Smith gone back to the Bulldogs. Yeah. I mean, if it wasn't, it was just so weird. I mean, the Bulldogs seemed to be playing in Geelong colours.
Yeah.
No, it was
Both
utterly
jumpers,
confusing.
As standalone jumpers, were really nice. They just shouldn't have been played in that game. They should have. I know they stretched it over a couple of weeks. Play them in one of the other games.
I don't think you need to change your colours to celebrate Sir Doug Nicholls' round. What did you make of Bevo versus Kane, Jake?
Oh, bit of theatre, It's not something that we won't remember it and couldn't care less, to be honest.
It's on our rundown, so I'm just asking about it. Well, I've got an opinion on it.
There's a shock.
I know that Kane can overstate things at times, but I've had a look at that vision again and again, because obviously we'll be discussing it on the agenda setters this week. All he did was say Bevo, nod his head and say Bevo, when Luke Beveridge was giving him a filthy look. Now, if Luke Beveridge can't contain his emotions at a time like that, then he needs to. It shows me that he hasn't learned anything from his recent outbursts, and they haven't all been against Kane Cornes.
I disagree. I just reckon he saw the bloke that has been annoying him, eyeballed him. He spoke up and he's just dismissive of it.
But he does it. He's done it with Tom Morris. He just keeps doing it. He did it with Damien Barrett. Jake, you and I were at the Tasmania breakfast on Friday, and you noted that I think Chris Fagan hadn't been initially mentioned as a coach of interest, and you spoke to Brendan Gale, and he said, "Oh, look, he actually." Or one of us spoke to Brendan Gale. I think it was Sam McClure. Sorry. Yeah. Anyway, Brendan Gale said, of course, Chris
I asked about
Fagan.
the marquee players.
You did. But isn't it funny that Luke Beveridge, who's out of contract at the end of this year, is not on Tasmania's radar? I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. Is he someone you want?
He's on other clubs' radars, though.
Oh, absolutely. He's been on Melbourne's radar, although not now. I mean, they'll announce a new deal for him in the next few weeks, I reckon.
He's a combative... some of these coaches, and we've seen this with, Alistair Clarkson, Dennis Pagan, Kevin Sheedy, Damien Hardwick.
Kevin
a lot of these
Sheedy
guys
would be perfect for Tasmania if he were 20 years younger.
Yep.
Not Luke Beveridge, because he is not a unifying force.
No, but he's not. You just said they're not on the radar, and that's clear. It's very likely he'll end up staying at the Bulldogs.
Yeah, but I don't think, even if he was out of contract and we weren't sure, I still don't think it's interesting he's not.
I disagree on that. And unifying, he's a pugnacious character. And maybe some of the time you want the if you're the smaller club, say you're Tasmania or the Bulldogs, you want someone to get in and have a crack on your behalf too.
He's very us against them. That's his MO.
Well, Chris Scott does that.
I think in the scheme of things that have
Chris Scott sticks up for Bailey Smith when he's cracking cocaine gangs on social media.
Hang on, we're having a go at Beveridge, and the person who's picked the biggest fight on the weekend is not Beveridge.
Is Ross Lyon.
It's Ross Lyon.
He's not on their radar either.
No.
Before we take a break, the other moment out of that game was the ball in or out for the mark. Out of bounds or
I thought it was a mark.
Yeah, so did I.
Are you talking about the technology?
Well, the technology, but just the decision paid, and it was like, was it out of bounds or not when he took the mark?
Yep. And did Chris Scott make a comment about it?
He said something about the arc, yeah. But I thought it was in. I thought that I thought there were other poor decisions that hurt the Bulldogs. I didn't think that was one
really
of them.
bad decision. We'll get to that with it.
Yeah.
The English one.
Yeah. All right, we'll take a break there. We'll come back, talk about what's going wrong with the Blues.
We're online all the time. Just search Age Real Footy on Facebook or Twitter.
But Toby Green in game 250 could really put the dagger into the heart of the Blues. And it is fitting that he would be best on ground in a milestone game.
Well, welcome back. The Blues season is back on the brink with a loss to GWS. Can they turn it around, Jake? Can they get on one of these, second half of the year, nothing to lose now rolls?
I'm sceptical.
Yeah.
I with Carlton, I think that Graham Wright, well, he's got some very big decisions to make, but I don't think they're good enough. I think another way to look at Carlton is that there's 12 months between the middle of 23 and the middle of 24, and that's the period where they're good. And either side of that, they haven't been good under Voss.
Is their list overrated?
Yeah. Yeah,
it is, but also that same
it
list
is,
can
but
get,
it's got the basis of being a really good team if you can add to it.
They're a good enough team to be leading games at half time. Now, this wasn't the case in this game about fading out in the second half. They did kick goals in the second half. If you're good enough to be to be competitive for half a game, it's not just about that talent. There's got to be more going on. They've got the difference in this game, I think, was that they're a team that they've got well known. They've got their star power at the top, and then they've got role players, and some of their B graders just aren't quite good enough. This was a game where their stars just didn't play well. Wiedering had a stinker, and other guys weren't able to carry the load.
Go back to the Geelong game. They're so dependent on 5 or 6 players.
Yeah,
and this is not where I could contrast them with Collingwood. Where footy's at. Look at Collingwood with all those players out. They're in trouble. Now, they did have Nick Dacos. They had Nick Dacos lifting them, but there's a system, and Carlton rely a lot on Wiedering, Curnow, Mackay, Cripps, Walsh.
Yeah.
And Jake, so you talk about Graham Wright.
Yep.
So is it right that when Collingwood were looking for a new coach, I think Michael Voss was an applicant?
Yep. He was in the process.
Yeah, and don't think...
He wasn't... Well, the runner-up was long. The runner-up was Adam Kingsley.
Yep, so he didn't come close.
Further to that, the other person that was heavily... Graham Wright had a lot of interest in was Sam Mitchell. And, of course, Sam Mitchell, that was a leverage for the handover being brought forward.
So Michael Voss clearly wasn't rated by Graham Wright in the top 3.
At that time.
At that time. So now and I'm not blaming Michael Voss for this, by the way. I'm just saying he's out of contract at the end of next year.
Yep.
And he's got a list which is overrated. No early draft picks because they've traded all of them away. They might trade to Koning and get a draft pick back, whatever. What does Graham Wright need to do? Because you hear that it's all footy. Even though he's becoming CEO, the changes will be all footy, obviously.
Well, they need to get better players, and they particularly need small forwards. If I had to specifically, I think the one thing I'd say about Carlton, where they're at, they have these holes. I spoke to a former assistant coach who'd been there for a while, who followed them fairly closely at the club during that Carlton series I did, and he said Carlton have got 8 crabs. He said 8 guys that play most games that are not good enough, right? And that was it. When you get a coach who really follows very, very granular way. It says these guys, and name some of them, I think, there's 8 that are not good enough. Now, where are you going to find those 6, 7 players? Because it's not going to be turned around with 1 or 2. You're going to need to develop a few, and you need to find a few.
This goes back to the security concern about the quality of being able to do that just through the draft. Now, unless you've got access to some of the academies or NGAs, it's hard to go and find those players. But the sorts of players you're talking about, if you're saying small forwards, you can actually go and find. They're a more readily available player than trying to find a star midfielder.
Yeah.
You can find, even if you go and get if you dumb down what you want from that player. You say we want speed and we want pressure and harassment, and the goals will come. If we just need fast, tough hunters in the forward line. That's what they need. But they also need another, Williams is always missing. Like, they need another runner than Sard off the halfback flank. The game's about that. They lost Newman. The game's about that rebound run.
So the AFL has backed them. They've given them more Thursday and Friday night games, which is extraordinary to me. They've got Essendon, North and West Coast over the next 3 weeks. Now,
Essendon, fair enough.
Essendon are banged up. And they have
to beat West Coast.
Essendon Richmond was probably one of the worst games I've seen all year. I mean, I sat next to you, Michael,
terrible.
and it was a poor quality game with great theatre.
It wasn't for that reason. It was one of the worst sitting next to me.
No, I enjoyed it. It was great theatre at the start, as the Dreamtime game always is, but it was a terrible game.
Did you both convene inside to the very good red that was on offer?
Well, we'd already done that.
Very good red that was on offer.
May not have convened outside, Jake.
No, I mean, look. Those games are fascinating for the people you meet and talk to, and obviously there's a huge Indigenous crisis at the moment within the AFL. So there was a lot to talk about behind the glass, Jake, but it was a bad game. What I'm saying is Carlton could win the next 3 games quite easily because Essendon really got more injuries out of that game. And yet I don't see them anywhere near a finals contender this year.
No.
Melbourne, it's an interesting contrast. Melbourne and Carlton both started badly. What Melbourne are doing feels more real. Like Melbourne, there seems to be more of a higher possibility of upside in what they're producing because they're scoring again.
They got a better list.
Well,
they've got similar stars, and they've both got holes.
Yeah, I think
Pretty
Melbourne
similar, I reckon.
I think pretty similar. But one thing I'd say for Carlton, they're kind of stuck in this position as we've outlined. But this is fixable because they've got that core to add players too. So this is not a team that's. You'd still rather be them than a lot of other clubs, St Kilda and all sorts of teams. You'd rather be with the list. You'd rather have Carlton's.
And I'd rather have Lever and May, even with injuries and stuff, as my defenders. And, they did win a flag in 2021.
Yeah.
Carlton
absolves all.
Yeah.
One point before we move on from Friday night, and particularly being behind the glass and sitting there at the dinner, and did enjoy Dean Rioli being interviewed on stage. And they said, "So Dean, there's been talk of another team, and what do you think about a team up in Darwin?" He said, "Look, it's pretty hot."
Didn't give it a ringing endorsement, did he? The old Dean.
Are you kidding me? What a play that heat.
Yeah, well, some of us had to work at that game, and gee, that was.
And work you did.
Oh, yeah, God,
some of us had to work to get through watching that game.
It wasn't a good game, and look, Richmond was spirited, and good on them for fighting it out, and they were very competitive with the team they had, given those 3 players, Lynch, Nankervis in particular, and Bolter.
Yeah. What do you think of North Saturday night?
It was so disappointing. You wrote about this, Gleeson, about North really there should be a bit of a powwow down there this week after that performance. I know they're playing the top team, but the players that Collingwood had out, and they lost Maynard during the game, and we're not talking average players, we're talking more Pendlebury, Sidebottom, DeGoey, Hill, Norm Smith medalist, Schultz, McStay, their best key forward. So you're looking at 8 players in their best side and probably 5 of their best 10
and you're
12.
in it at 3/4 time.
And you're in the game, and you just capitulate like that. I thought it was really disappointing, and they should be asking questions of their fitness.
Yeah. They're running up and down on the spot in the last quarter, and they're just...
What do you think, Cara?
I think North have had a terrible year. They've been so disappointing.
Well, they drew with Brisbane.
They drew with Brisbane, who went down to Tasmania, did not want to be there, and I reckon disrespected them. Yeah. And they should have won. They should have thrashed Richmond last week.
They should have beaten Essendon.
And who else have they beaten? Melbourne.
They should have beaten.
Yeah, and they beat Melbourne earlier in the year?
Yes, they did.
Yeah. So that's their 2 wins. Richmond, completely unconvincing, and Richmond should have won. Taranto kicked straight, they win. And we're not nearly as good on their list is not nearly as good as North Melbourne.
Well, the access that North have had to talent, it should be they should be better.
No, I'm running out of patience with North. I think they were terrible, and I think there are some real problems there.
Well, I didn't like when you look at the recruits and you go, okay, well, Parker, Darling, Daniel, you think, okay, I get what you're doing. You're trying to get a bit of a help to bridge to the next thing. But this is the sort of game where you go, well, what was the point? What's the point? Like, you bring these players in with experience so that when you get into critical moments like this, well, yeah, you can establish culture, and they will have been wonderful for training standards and all that sort of thing, and the cultural get. But when you get into those critical games, this is where the experience should count. And experience is one thing. Having the capacity to still influence games is another. And I just felt none of them could really do that anymore. So you go, well, what's been the point of that? That whole sort of experiment of the 3 of them. I mean, conversely, I thought it was a pretty impressive win from Collingwood against all of that, the way they picked them apart in the last quarter.
Look, Collingwood, the system they had, the belief they've got, they were very impressive in the situation they were in. When, don't forget, Myercheck went down and he seems indestructible. He came back on the field. I couldn't really jump. But they found a way. And Nick Dacos, what did he have, 28 after half-time? And Ned Long, we've got all these high North draft picks like LDU, etc. Here's a guy that's pick 105, delisted by Hawthorn, and what did he have, 15 score involvements?
15 score involvements.
14 tackles or something?
Yeah.
Jake, is Sam Mitchell right to be worried about the Hawks' centre bounces of recent weeks?
I'm not sure it's the centre bounce, but Gleeson,
certainly the clearances.
They've been
beaten around the ball. And it's partly so the losses they've had, and they keep they're 3-1 against top 8 teams. They beat GWS and that.
They're 1-3.
1-3. What is it? Well, 3-1 losses, 1-3 wins.
Sorry.
And they won one without Day. Now Day's a huge impact on them. I mean, he's their best player, and he's out, and he'll be out for a while. Now, their forwards are down, maybe through service, but they're relying still. Mabior is a fluky proposition. Gunston is old, so he'll play a really good game and then won't back it up, because that's what old players do. They'll play. He's still serviceable, but he's not going to be a reliable, bankable every week as he was. Lewis is still out. Culture Deer came back for one, was dropped. He'll probably come back in again this week. So they've been in flux a lot in the forward line. You've got the midfield's just getting smashed around the ball. That was where they had the real advantage. And so Newcombe, good player. You know, they've got the players still there, but
I think playing a good team is a good thing to get back into form.
And Sicily's been a bit up and down, like even within games.
He's been down.
Yeah, his kicking was off early in the season. Oh, he still has good
His
moments.
game against the Gold Coast was really poor.
Yeah. So the answer is yes. Mitchell should be worried, and it'll be interesting because they've got a good record against Collingwood. So I think they'll go in with confidence. They'll go in with confidence to this. And
the injuries you mentioned are right, and Will Day, and you wrote about this. I mean, without him, their structure has fallen down, but they were good enough last year to withstand, certainly to perform better than. That was a pretty disappointing loss, I thought. I mean, they were thrashed in the end.
Yeah. They played, let's be fair, they played a pretty good side.
They did, and there was a lot of love for Chris Fagan with that milestone game. And you just sort of, I think obviously some bad blood between Chris Fagan and his old club over what happened with the First Nations families, etc., and Hawthorn's initial handling of it. A lot of those people are gone from Hawthorn now, or most of them. And it was really nice to see at the end of the game, you know, some of the embracing between old club and their old footy boss.
It was a significant win for them too, though. Like Hawthorn has done well against them, and so to win on the MCG, they hadn't played the Hawthorn at the MCG. They'd often played them down in Tasmania. To beat them there, having come off, you know, a draw as well, and
a bad lot, and they've had a loss and a draw. Yeah.
I thought it was really good. I thought that they're small forward. The three goals in 3 minutes from Charlie Cameron really turned the game, and it did highlight. Maybe it's too easy to point it, but did Brisbane sort of illustrate or magnify a problem that they have in their with their small defenders?
I'll tell you one thing in the game I'd like to highlight that no one even mentions. There's a guy who plays around the ball called McCluggage. Like, he doesn't get. Like,
he's the most reliable player in the foot.
He's such a good player.
AFL.
He's so classy. I mean, teams like Essendon and Kilda, they would kill for McCluggage. They're like, God, he'd be outside of merit. He'd be easily their best player.
What do they say about the squeaky wheel? I mean, someone at Brisbane once said to me, I think it was during COVID, that there was one person no one ever needed to check in on. He was just he didn't need any. He's a low maintenance player. And so maybe that's why you never hear about him. But he just never lets them down, does he?
No. Yeah, I remember speaking to him after the prelim in the rooms, and he was just really relaxed. It's just like, oh, yeah, you just help them get into a grand final. It was just really, really cruisy, but he is a hell of a player.
Yeah, well, it's the fact that you look at...
Good pick up, Jake.
You look at Neil, and that's why. I mean, you're more focused on this guy as a phenomenon.
Well, he's nearly as good.
Oh, Jake, you're just peeling him out. All right, we'll take a break there, come back with quick questions.
Get access to every episode as it drops. Hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Rochelle has a sniff. He smells the goal. He snares the goal. And he will celebrate in style.
Welcome back. Straight into quick questions. Jake, the Crows are in the top 4. Will they still be there at the end of the season?
No, I don't think so. I don't think they're quite top 4, but they're certainly top 8 and possibly top 6. And I like watching them play.
Yeah.
I think they're in the right track.
Yeah, I agree. At the moment, I think Collingwood and Brisbane are locks for the top couple.
Unless there's a
and
disaster,
top four.
yeah.
Gold Coast and Adelaide. For me, Geelong and the Bulldogs will go up into the top
Well,
four.
put it this way. I think the Bulldogs are better than Adelaide,
Yeah.
but the Bulldogs' results have not gone that way. The Bulldogs have had a bit of bad luck with injury and just some results, like Thursday night.
Yeah, I agree. You agree?
I like the Crows. I just look, they need to make the top 8 clearly, and they need to win a final. And that's a win for me.
That's a very doable.
Yeah. The bye rounds, those enjoyable parts of the season, begin this weekend. Should the AFL change the system so there aren't multiple weeks with fewer games?
Well, they used to have it. There's 5 weeks of bye rounds. Start this week, round 12, and they end at the end of round 16. So it's not until round 17 that we're back to 9 games around.
So is it better to have like only 1 or 2 missing each week rather than like only half a round for 2 weeks?
I liked it when they made a massive show of Sydney Collingwood, I think they used to do in Sydney, and every other team had a bye. Every other team had a bye.
And then, those teams had 1 bye.
Yep. Now with the Thursdays and Fridays, do you do a Thursday-Friday game, and then it would be good to knock them off earlier, I think. But look, the fixture's difficult. I think they've made some major fixture blues this year, particularly with free-to-air TV, as I've written about. Well, that's a deeper problem. But I do think 5 rounds is a lot.
Yeah.
Don't you?
I don't like buys anyway. You're paid to play. Go and play. I just don't like them. Why interrupt the whole season and just take air out of the season for buys? I mean, I know they gave into the Players Association and the players to give them these buys. I don't like them. They're unnecessary.
The bigger issue, and obviously the big support from the Brisbane Lions here, is get rid of the pre-finals bye, which is when Gold Coast and Essendon will finally play that cyclone-damaged, cancelled game, and do it the week before the grand final. And the more I think about that, the more I think it's a good idea
for the concussions.
Yeah, and because it's fairer on the teams that finish in the top 2, because the pre-finals bye takes away that advantage. It massively advantages the bottom 4 teams.
Which they won the flag with.
Brisbane. And so if you win your first final and you finished in the top 4, you're basically playing 1 game in about a month, or over 3 weeks.
It was initially just a reaction to that stop the tanking.
Fremantle and North Melbourne.
Yeah. So I'll give you another really left field one. I think you could play the AFLW season in the season, and you could end up with the grand final in that week before the grand final.
Yep, good idea.
Final quick question. Should Port Adelaide consider an early departure for Ken Hinkley so Josh Carr can take over this season? More to the point, is there more to be gained by keeping Ken on, or should you bring forward the change, Jake?
I'd like to see it seen through. I don't, just on this, Josh Carr, do you really want to be taking over in a broken season where they've had these injuries, they've had all these problems, they're not good enough, they don't have a forward line that's cohesive or got enough players? Do you really want to be taking over in that situation?
I agree with Jake. I think that Ken Hinkley deserves the respect of his last game when it should be. I think a mid-season departure would be unedifying for him. I also think that, I know they haven't had a great season, but, Luke Hodge was arguing on the agenda setters last Tuesday night that they need to have a new the team needs to start learning the new system now, and how, Adam Muse took a full year to get his. I think it's different when you're already there. When you're already there as a senior assistant.
He's probably right, but is it easy to start learning a new game in the middle of a season rather than training it over a summer and then starting to play it? Can you really now flick a switch and say, right, boys, well, I've taken over. It's round 13, and this is how we're going to play now, and we're going to. And I don't know if it's as simple as that. And then knowing that you're going to have a big turnover of personnel.
Jake's point about the broken season is a good one.
Why would Josh Carr? Everyone says
exactly.
Talks about this like Josh Carr automatically would want to do this. I'm not sure that you would if you're in his position.
He doesn't get a choice. He's the next senior coach. Why? I got a broader question of why they didn't go to market rather than just appointing Josh. I don't like those. I didn't like it when Essendon did it with Ben Rutten, just sort of nominating without going through a full process to say, well, you're going to be our next coach.
Worked all right with Longmire.
Yeah. But I prefer I prefer to see.
And Goodwin. They chose Goodwin knowing he was
there.
Well, the key point is that the coach who's handing over does so very happily and willingly. That's the key point.
I think Ken Hinkley believes in Josh Carr. And the whole administration seems to believe in him, so we can only take them at their word.
But Ken didn't really want to give over the job, though, did he?
No, probably
See,
not.
I think that's the key point. Not. There's two preconditions. One is that the senior coach has to endorse the person who's coming, and the second is that along with the regime, obviously, and that the senior coach is very happy to be going. If the senior coach is not happy to be going, there's problems.
That's right. But then you've still, I'm just saying, the choice of, and
I don't think it's not
Clarkson
Mick
and Mitchell.
Malthouse. It's not like Mick Malthouse where he and Nathan Buckley didn't even really sort of like each other. Slightly different. I mean, Ken and Josh get on and respect each other.
I said two things. There was one out of two.
Yeah.
That's right.
You need two out of two for it to work.
My point is more broadly the choice of successor. You've got to have the plan is one thing, and Josh Carr could be terrific. I just prefer to go to market and see who else is out there. You don't know
when you
who else
listen
is
to
out
the
there.
names Tassie's looking at and those available, you go, true. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily go for Adam Simpson, but I do think that you'd have a look at Nathan Buckley, and I do think you'd have a look at John Longmire.
I think more former coaches will also be doing a bit of an Adam Simpson and taking their time in the media and picking games apart the way he is, and you're listening to him with some of that video analysis and going, that's really telling me stuff that I hadn't seen, and
He's
it
been
enhances
really
their
good
reputation.
But I just can't get past those last 3
No.
years at West Coast.
I'm differentiating the media from coaching.
No, fair enough, Jake.
All right, that is all we have time for this week. Thanks to both of you for joining us, and thanks also to Channel 7 and Fox Footy for the audio we've used in this episode. If you'd like to get in touch, you can do so via email, realfootypod@theage.com.au. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and the Expert Tips podcast will be back on Thursday. Catch you then.